Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Poison Pen and welcome to the book launch for Dean Koontz and his wonderful new book, Elsewhere. You can see that we have various copies, and I'm delighted to say that Dean, a serious bibliophile who understands the importance of actual signed books, thoughtfully actually signed all our copies, and they are here available for sale. So I'd like to thank you. That's a heroic effort on your part.
Uh, I think that's down-defining heroic, but I was happy to do it. You said before we went on air, you enjoy my emails. Well, I likewise enjoy yours. So, and well, for many of the same reasons, but just don't throw any of those emojis at me, which you haven't, I suppose.
No, I've resisted emojis for you, Dean. I didn't think. Anyway, Dean has over 500 million volumes in print. He's in 38 languages. And as a consequence, he has developed an impressive personal library of his very own books. How many of your books do you actually have?
Well, first I want to back up. It's not in print. It's actually how many we've sold. I don't know how many are in print because publishers don't tell you all the time what they print. But the how many of my own books? Well, I have multiple copies. So we're in the process of getting ready to move, and I've realized I have way too many copies of my own books. I have like 77 books in print and 100 and some I've written, and I probably have 100,000 or more copies of them all. So I'm trying to get rid of that. Then I discovered a new library we're building a house, which is 40 feet by 20, will only house other people's books that I own. It won't house any of mine. So I'm not going to have to put all my copies in a storeroom for a while. But yeah, I love physical books. E-books are great, but I'm a guy who grew up with the physical book. I love the fact that the older books used to be beautiful objects too. I actually collect books from the Decca period, 20s, 30s, 40s, because they were cool. They were really interesting. I actually buy books with the cover. So, because they're from that period. But I've encountered like E. Philip Oppenheim and some writers who were kind of interesting in that period that nobody's heard of since. So yeah, I'm rambling here, but I have a lot of books. We're moving, and I just finished packing. I think it's close to 1,500 boxes of books.
And you're not done.
I'm not done. So I could be dead in hell. I'm not sure, but we'll find out in about 3 weeks.
Well, in addition to his own books, Dean is a compulsive researcher and undoubtedly has a phenomenal number of books related to books that he himself has authored, or just subjects he wants to explore. Do you tend to purge those, Dean, when you're done with whatever, or do you hang on to them?
Purging books is like purging people. Like, I can't do it. It's especially if it's a research book, and I think, well, I'll never write on that subject again. And many years ago, I discovered I threw away a book, then I couldn't find ever again and read it. So no, if it's anything that could possibly be a research book, that even sometimes includes pictures of cute cats. I'm sorry, but you just don't throw away anything. So no, and that's why it grows ever larger, and I don't know where this is going. We thought we were downsizing, but now it looks like we're having a whole house that's books, and then we'll have to have another house to live in.
Possibly you can use books as insulation in walls between rooms. In case you think I've digressed too far, one of the reasons I brought this up was that the origin story of Elsewhere really relates to Dean's research books and an alleyway, byway, whatever, he wandered down into quantum physics. How long ago did you start looking at quantum physics?
Oh, at least 30 years ago. I've long loved reading science. I do it for pleasure. I know a lot of people will find that repugnant, but I do. I really like reading science, especially quantum mechanics, anything related to it. Molecular biology is fascinating. And so I have all of those, but there is this thing, it's not really in quantum physics, but it's related. It goes back to 1957 when physicists proposed that there might be multiple universes, in fact, an infinite number, and they all split off from ours. Every time something major happens or a decision is made, boom, the universe comes into play. I've read many books in various science fiction novels and nonfiction books about multiverse, but I thought I'd never ever write one because it seems like it would have to become so flamboyant, science fiction-y that I wouldn't care to write it. And then one day I was thinking to myself, steal from that shelf, I was thinking not about work or ideas of books, and it suddenly dawned on me I'd never done a story with a father-daughter relationship. And I thought that would be interesting if the kid was like 11 or 12, precocious, and the father was of a certain type, and they had a real deep bond related around novels. And but that's not a novel itself. Then it occurred to me about a minute later, what if the mother walked out on them 7 years ago when the girl was 4 and has never come back, and they kind of expect she's dead, and this girl is yearning for a mother she hasn't had in 7 years. That's still not a novel, but it starts to be something that interests me, because what interests me is human relationships. And that gave me an interesting dynamic. And then I thought, but now we're getting into a sort of a traditional thing that's been done a lot, the disappearing spouse or somebody else and what happened to them. And I just didn't want to go down the familiar road. Suddenly I thought, oh, the multiverse, what if comes into the hands of these people a device that allows them to move to different versions of this little beach town they live in. And in one of those versions, there might be Michelle, the mother, who walked out of them, who never married Jeffy, the husband, who never gave birth to Amity, the daughter, and is alone. And that would be very appealing to them, to reconstitute the family that got lost. And that's where this started. And that's what I thought the book would be entirely about. Well, that became about 15% of what the book's about. Because once I got into it, what happens when they actually use this device became much more fun than I ever anticipated. And so it sort of came out of all this research. But like a lot of books that I find, the best thing I do is it starts with characters, and then something else gets layered onto it, and you find the story.
Well, certainly in this book, the characters of the family, Jeffy the father, Amity the daughter, and maybe or maybe not the missing wife, whose name is Michelle. But another fascinating character is Ed, who in his way is, he's sort of like the Gandalf, of this book. I really like Ed. Now, Amity and Jeffy call him Spooky Ed, and he lives behind them in a canyon and appears to be a homeless man. And he appears. And did you find him? He helps provoke the instigating incident, whatever we want to call it. But that's a role that, why did he need to be old? I guess is an interesting question.
Well, he turns out to be when Jeffy, and I've got a dog insisting her head has to be.
Is that what you're doing?
Yeah. And she's just pushing her head really right up in the right. Dad, it's my time. But, and it's okay. She can. And so, yes, Spooky Ed, this came out of the real situation in California, where homelessness is rampant. And the government can't seem to do anything to help anybody. And as a consequence, a lot of the local, they come in, and if a homeless camp gets too difficult to control, gets pressing too much into the community, they sort of break it up. But the homeless have started going in a little bit out there, past the edge of the community, into sort of the forest or something, and tenting there. And so Spooky Ed is this guy who lives out there just beyond Jeffy and Amity's house, and he is a little atypical. He dresses in a bow tie and a sport coat and a shirt every day, and he goes in for his shower in a facility in town, comes back, and he's fallen into into the habit of sitting on the porch talking with Jeffy. And they think he's kind of a sweet, interesting old homeless guy. Except one night he shows up and says, here's this gift box. And it's a ratty old box, tied with string, and said, there's something in this. You can't open the box. For God's sake, never touch or use this. And there are very bad people looking for me because this cost $76 billion to make and develop. And I'm going to give it to you to hide. And if I don't come back in a year, it means they found me and killed me. And then you have to put this in a barrel of cement, take it out to sea and drop it in 1,000 feet of water. So they think, oh, I thought he was a normal sort of homeless person. Obviously, he's a little mentally ill. Except the next morning, all those very bad people show up looking for whatever's in that box. And Spooky Ed was just such a fun character. I thought of him as all kind of character actors we used to love, like Ed Bagley, somebody great would have been Thomas. Well, it doesn't matter what actors we were great for, but I thought of all those great character actors sometimes carried the movie on their own, and that got me to where I was with Spooky.
Well, I really like Spooky Ed, and he doesn't entirely vanish after his initial appearance. But, it's one of those moments when he hands it over and says, you must never touch this. And it reminded me, I was like, all those suspense books where don't go into the attic, or don't go down in the cellar. And you absolutely know when he does that they are going to touch this device. You just know it.
And I knew that, and I thought of the same thing you said, that don't go into that house, sort of thing. So I didn't want them to actually do that. I wanted them to have a certain respect for the fact that, okay, some very bad people have shown up looking for this. It basically closed down their neighborhood. They didn't find this. But now we have opened the box. We are looking at this thing. And it looks like a cell phone with no features to it except the home button. And they're kind of like, nah, I don't think we should touch that. And I didn't want them to touch it. Because I didn't want them to really violate that thing where you say, you idiot, don't go into the house, don't touch it. But that's why Amity has this little white mouse is for pet. She's in training for a dog. She's not sure she's able to be responsible for a dog, so she's got a white mouse for a few years. And the mouse is pushed on her shoulder, it's Snowball. And the mouse becomes fascinated with this glimmering device, runs down her shoulder, jumps onto the device, lands on it, and they both, father and daughter, go, "Oh!" And the screen lights up, and they reach for the mouse, and of course it's the mouth. That's not giving much away either, because it happens right in the very beginning.
Well, that's a very good point, that it's the mouse, not the people. Good. That's the mouse, It's so appropriate for California, It's like the mouse, right, Disney. But no, it's just that as a reader that somebody, if not necessarily Amity, somehow this device is going to be activated, because otherwise, why would you have introduced it in the first place, right? So I think a fascinating question, Dean, when you're talking about parallel worlds, is if you are going to travel amongst them, what happens if you get to one that isn't a good one? And if you get to one that you don't like, can you escape? And can you ever really go back to the one you started from? I mean, there's so many questions.
Well, one of the beauties of this little device is it has a couple of buttons and it can return you to where you started from. Although there's all kinds of things that can go wrong with that, as we like to explain the story. But yeah, you're going to end up, it wouldn't be fun if you kept ending up in better worlds than what you live in here. So they end up in a couple of very other different Swampy Dog beaches. I tried to keep all the action in the same little beach town,
right?
Because otherwise, it's out there in too science fiction. So it's always sort of the same town, except they notice things that are different when they get to the first one. And gradually they begin to discover it's a little more different than a little different. and there are very horrifying aspects to this place. But they are fortunately able to get back, and that happens relatively early in the book. And then they think, well, we're never going up there like this again. But this, it isn't up to them. Momentum of the story, then momentum of what they've done carries the story forward. And unfortunately, they're going to end up in a couple more places that are maybe even more inhospitable than the first one I go to. But I'm a guy that hope is, I'm an optimist. I've always been since as young as I can remember. And my books are threaded through with hope, no matter how dark they get. So as much as they're going through darkness, and there are some moments, even Barbara, I say to myself, I love these characters. What the hell am I doing? I'm tormenting the hell out of them. That says something strange about my psychology, I think. It's out of it. Though sometimes, some books, characters don't. I'm wandering the field, but yeah, they will get home, and everything will be okay. Maybe.
So, Swabidan Beach, does that actually mean anything significant, or you just picked a name out of the blue?
Well, we have Laguna Beach and all these different beaches. Newport Beach here, and there's Huntington Beach, and some of them have more interesting names as you go down the coast. And Swabidan, meaning elegant or beautiful, seemed to be in Spanish, seemed to be a nice name for a beach and a little exotic. But it's modeled after Laguna Beach, which is 6 miles down the coast from where I live. But I didn't want to offend all the people in Laguna Beach. I turned in their town into a fascist even.
No, you didn't want to. And actually, I think it's probably wise to give it a fictional name. But I mean, it could have been a mountain town, or it could have been a lot of things. But, since you yourself are more or less on a California beach, it seemed reasonable that you would want to set your book there. In your books, and I'm looking back at Jane Hawk as well, those 5 books, which you and I really came together over, the idea of a deep state, or, a bad actor that is pursuing power, financed by whatever it is, not necessarily the official government, but rather some kind of unofficial government, also plays a role in this book. What interests you about the idea of a deep state as the antagonist?
I think it goes back to when I was a young reader, and I would read books like Parallax View, which and there were a lot of stories back in that time about the deep state, the intelligence community being not just serving the government, but maybe beginning to try to control the government. And that's always been an interest to me, because we live in a world where in less stable states than ours, if ours is stable, you see this happening all over the world, where the elements within the state become not servants of people, but want the people to be servants of men. So I think this is a scary sort of thing to play with. And in this case, if they could get hold of this particular device, there's infinite power. You could rule almost every version of reality. And for power-mad sociopathic narcissist, that's very appealing. And my villain is a sociopathic narcissist. So he wants that device more than anything else.
When you wrote this book, I don't think that QAnon was quite as visible as it has become in the last few months. But, it did, when you were writing Jane, it wasn't quite so obvious either. But it is scary to think that there are, this is something running through society where groups of people have decided that there are indeed deep state actors, or people subverting, ordinary government. We're living in such a weird time, and I think your book speaks to that. Jane was a little less. What do I want to say about Jane? The people there were more specific in the sense of what kind of bad actors they were, as in elsewhere. they seem to be generally more dangerous rather than as targeted to me as they were in Jane Hawk. But maybe I'm wrong.
Well, the Jane Hawk series is more, there's a tiny element of science, advanced science in it, but it's basically a classical suspense format in those books. Whereas elsewhere it brings in that element of the fantastic a little more strongly, and therefore the villains become a little more flamboyant, let's say. The Jane Hawk books, they're all more grounded in our world. And I love the Jane Hawk series. She was one of the favorite characters I've ever been able to come up with. And I would have loved to go on and on with her, but sometimes you just say, okay, enough is enough. And character has to see, especially in a series of Jane's where 5 novels that has an overriding arc. And you can't go on with that overriding arc forever, or at least I can't. And elsewhere is a standalone, so you don't have that. But yeah, I'm sort of fascinated with power. I'm a person who wants, the last thing I want is power over other people. Because with power comes responsibility. I mean, if you're sane, and there's a lot of people who love power aren't particularly sane, but if you are sane, it comes with a great deal of responsibility. The last thing I would ever want is be in a position of power. The most power I want is being able to entertain people, and that's not power that tells them what to do with their lives. So I'm sort of fascinated with people who are so power-driven that they want to tell everyone else how to live, what to do. And I think there's endless material in that kind of totally psychotic personality, because it's not normal to want to tell other people what to do with their lives. And good politicians, good people in public service actually want to help people with their lives, don't want to micromanage them. But we see in history how many people really want that power to micromanage them. And I find that terrifying.
Some of it comes on incrementally too. I think there are people who start out on a small scale, and then it just begins to consume them. We've seen that happen here in the store over 30 years. That fame can be a very addictive thing. We've seen people start out, unknown, and then gradually, as they become famous, it changes them, and it becomes a drive for, I don't know what exactly, but anyway, I'm not sure that people are born power mad so much as develop it as they move along.
I would say that's probably true. The fame is itself is a kind of power, because it elevates you in other people's eyes. It's part of this I've never much liked at all. It's why I've never done a national book tour. I have done a number of book signings, and we had times there were a couple of thousand people showed up. And it's lovely, and they're always very nice, but there's something about, they elevate you, and I understand it, because John D. MacDonald was elevated in my mind to something above humanity. And, but if I had ever met him, I would not have dealt with him that way. And when you're the object of it, it's a little disconcerting. Those people coming up to you on side, they're no different than you are. And I was given this little talent. I didn't do anything to earn the talent. What I do is work at the craft, try to use the talent in the best way. And I often say almost everybody, it seems to me, has something likewise that they could do if their life got focused on what that was. I don't mean to go off on a tangent, but I have noticed over the years that I'm friends with a number of artists, and I've noticed that almost every artist I've ever known wants to be a writer. They don't want to be an artist. And it strikes me as I've watched that a number of people have talents, but it isn't what they want to do. They want to do something else instead of focusing on what if they do have. And so when when somebody thinks there's something special about me, it's only this, that I recognize what talent I have. And believe me, I cycled through some other things. I'm no musician. I played the drums for a while. I played the guitar for a while. I actually did paint for a while and sold what I painted. But I realized I'm never going to be top rate at any of these things. And I did realize I had a better chance of making the writing work. So in a sense, I could have gone, like a lot of people do, away from what my basic instinct was to do. But I didn't. And that's simply, I was lucky. I had a spouse who pushed me. I had an English teacher who pushed me. And all these things happened in the right way for me. So it isn't that I'm anybody special. I just had things fall together in a way. And that's partly luck, but it's also partly recognizing the luck and not letting it pass you by. And that's the only difference for me. So I understand what you're saying. I've known people who get to this point and they thrive on it. I don't like it. I like going out to dinner and nobody knowing who I am. And we've lived here so long that everybody knows who I am. But they're very nice and they don't come up to you all the time. And if they do, they don't come up to say, I hated the last book. They come up to tell you that you changed my life or something like that, which is lovely. But fame is empowered. For me, it's neither one. It would be great to be a writer who managed to be anonymous but successful, except there's very few of them. Thomas is about the only one I can think of. And he doesn't write all that much.
I'm sorry, Thomas who?
Pynchon.
Oh, Thomas Pynchon. Okay, your voice wavered just at that moment. So I can say, from my own personal experience, you can see me here chatting to Dean and we become friends, but the first time I ever met Dean was in New York at Book Expo, and his publisher invited me as a special treat to come up and meet Dean. And I'm telling you, I was a babbling idiot. I really was. It was so embarrassing. I couldn't think of anything to say except, I love your books or whatever, which is what we noticed that overtakes most customers in the store when an author is here and you go up to get your book signed and you're reduced to kind of this, and I've often thought, remembering back to that I would try never to be quite so idiotic again, but I find it really interesting and ironic that you and I have become really, correspondents and kind of friends after that really awful beginning, which you probably don't remember because I was so completely idiotic.
No, actually, we had your face in a fire with a big red line through it. Possibly dangerous. But after we met years later again, then I took you out of that file and everything.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Now, I wanted to go to page 11 of Elsewhere because I think you said something in here that really spoke to me. And Jeffrey was talking to Amity about her mother, her missing mother, Michelle. And Amity has asked if they were to go to some different world or somehow or other find Michelle, would Jeffrey marry her again? Because he's in the process of having their marriage dissolved. He's not in the process of having her declared dead, right? But he is in the process of dissolving, after 7 years, their marriage. And I really liked what Jeffy has to say when he says, no, I don't think so. Your mom wouldn't want to marry me again. She and I were dreamers, but with a difference. She dreamed of things that were possible. Being a songwriter, recording her own songs, having a successful career. Me, I dream of living in the 1930s, seeing Benny Goodman live in the Manhattan Room of the Hotel Pennsylvania in New York. Of worlds that never were and never can be, Tolkien to Heinlein. I'm all about big bands and hobbits, just a consumer of wonder. But your mom, she created wonder. And I thought that was such a wonderful distinction between people who like to consume wonder, of whom I'm certainly one, and people who create wonder, and you are certainly one of those.
Well, it's, thank God we mesh the two kinds of people. But everybody creates a certain wonder in their lives, depending on how they treat other people. But yeah, Jeffy, you're writing a character that you want people to really like and relate to. And in this case, Jeffy has waited 7 years for his wife not to come back. And I could have said that Jeffy went to court or declared dead, which you can do after 7 years, somebody missing, but he can't bring himself to that because he still loves her. And to acknowledge even to himself that she may be dead is a step he can't take. But he does at this point have to say, 7 years, I've got to put an end to this marriage. When I got to that moment with Jeffy, I really liked him. I thought, this is the guy, and then I think the paragraph that you read came subsequent to that, because he and his daughter loved to read fantasy novels, whatever, and it's one of the bonds, and ironically, it becomes the reason they're able to survive with what's coming forward, because all of this reading they've done is taught them how to deal with this kind of wild adventure. Yeah, it's I'm a consumer of wonder and somebody who tries to create it. So sort of both, and I think every writer is that to some degree.
It's very, very likely true, and you're certainly right that having had this stupendous disruption in their life and to their family, they maybe were psychologically prepared for further disruption in a way that people who haven't been tested would not be. Now, before we take questions, there's one other thing I wanted to talk to Dean about, because somewhere in all of these parallel worlds, you have a real Franz Kafka moment. I remember having to read The Cockroach when I was at Stanford, and here we are in the middle of whatever, and here comes the cockroach. But it's an AI cockroach, so not quite the Kafka cockroach. Did you have fun developing that?
Yeah, that's not the first place they end up. That's the most strange place they end up. But it's, yeah, I thought, what the world, one of the fun things about this kind of story is plopping your characters into a situation that is exceedingly strange that they can't understand. And then they have to find their way to the truth of what they're dealing with. And in the case of a story like this, they activate that device and they go outside the front door, and it's Swabiga Beach. It's the same town, except it's not. And in this particular case, it's very quiet. And they realize they're looking up and down the California coast, and there are no lights. And then as they get into town, there are no people. And then they begin to make strange discoveries, one after the other. And that's spun out of something I've been reading about. There's a whole long list of scientists, including the late Stephen Hawking, who have said artificial intelligence will be the death of humanity. We have to move very carefully in this front. And other people can't wait to rush right into it and create it. And I thought, okay, what if they end up in the world where artificial intelligence was developed to the highest possible order, and you're not there anymore, but something else is. And that was great fun to figure out how I would deal with that and how they would deal with it. It's only a sort of sliver of the book because there's so much activity in it. But of course, because they've read The Princess Bride, and they've read Heinlein, they've read Tolkien, they can adapt to this and figured out what's going on pretty quickly. They put the evidence.
Well, he's not the only strange creature that they encounter, but I particularly like the fact that he was a cockroach. As I said, a Kafka moment. So I'm hearing a little dings over there. Patrick, do you have any questions that you want to present?
Sure, yeah.
All right, we have some fans who've been sending in questions, Steve.
All right, Dean. Lisa asks, is there a story you want to write but find yourself stalling because you're not sure?
It's rare that when a piece comes together in my mind, I instantly know it'll work. I will say, one of those was Elsewhere. As soon as that little family unit fell together and I realized we're going to get this interesting device, then I knew it would work. I couldn't wait to get to the keyboard. But frequently, my biggest, I think, everything that halts you from writing a novel or from continuing one if you get writer's block, is always the same thing. It's self-doubt. And I have enormous self-doubt every time I start a story. And page by page, it never goes away. You just have to get past it. When you say, see the story, but I can't get into it, that's self-doubt. And it's you have to find your way past it. Usually the way past it, the way I use, is go ahead and write that first page, and then rewrite it to its seams, and then go to the next one. And keep doing that, and little by little, you start to have confidence in how the story is going to go.
So as a corollary question, does it ever get any easier, or does every book present its unique challenges and you're right back at ground zero?
It never gets easier. I hate to tell that to young writers, but when I was starting out, I thought, well, I was sort of an idiot when I started out, and I thought there's only a certain number of tricks that a writer has to learn. Once you learn them all, you can just put them together in different ways. And of course, what you learn over time is there's an infinite number of tricks or techniques, and you're never going to know all of them. And the more you write, the more it occurs to you of things you've not done, ways to approach or something that you wish you think, now I got to try that. But usually what that means is you're trying something you haven't quite ever done before. And as a consequence, it doesn't get easier, it gets harder, especially as you get older. And you never want to set the bar lower than what you've done before. That may accidentally happen because you've not done the job well, but you don't want to start out that way. So you're always setting the bar higher, and as a consequence, it's always getting more difficult.
Another question?
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Ray asks, she says, since the self-isolation, I've been reading your books that I had missed while working. Finished 8 books so far. Then she says, how often do you name a character from someone who has donated to your favorite charity?
I've only done that, I think, twice. And I learned the lesson. It's kind of difficult because you're stuck with the name. I did that with in life expectancy. The family, they had lost their brother and that they dearly loved. And they paid a lot of money in this charity auction for me to write. And Lori Lynn Hicks was the name. And it worked perfectly. It was the ideal name for the character. But in a couple of, I think I've done it 3 times actually. In a couple other cases, I found it difficult because names matter a lot. And a lot of times, names have symbolic meaning. Nobody needs to see it. We all live with cultural references that are very deep into our unconscious. And so we relate to things on an unconscious level that we don't have to relate to an unconscious level. And I'm always aware of that in character names. One of the Thomas books, for instance, most of the characters who come into the story who weren't there for the other book, all of their names, their last names anyway, are Hebrew words. Though you wouldn't know that unless you knew Hebrew. And as a consequence, it doesn't matter, except it mattered to me. And I started getting letters from people who read the Israeli edition or read the American edition. And it was amusing because I would get these letters saying, are you aware that so many characters in this book, their last names are actually Hebrew words? I had to write back and say, look at the most amazing coincidence. I had 10 characters with names, Hebrew words, and I was unaware of it. Yes, I was aware of it. And the words were chosen to identify the character. So when you're naming characters, I've stopped doing that. I've stopped saying, I will name somebody for some. When I'm asked that, I'll say, I'll send you a donation. Don't make me do this. And that works better.
Okay, I have, let's see, Wendy asked a question about your audiobooks, and are you happy with the readers?
Last few books, including the re-recording of Watchers, I had Eduardo Ballerini read them, and he is exceptional. And he doesn't get too flamboyant. He's able to define one character together exceedingly well. So I feel fortunate about that. And elsewhere, as there's two voices in elsewhere because there's a female voice for Amity. And I think they're doing a great job with recent ones. I'm very happy with them. I have so many books at Brilliance Audio. I've been with them for such a long time. And they're just a lot of fun to do.
I have several people saying they want more Jane Hawk. A number of people.
I love Jane Hawk. I never knew what the hell she was going to do next. It's one of those stories where the character truly broke everything. And I love the story. My editor at this book said, I love when Jane gets in a room alone with the bad guy and wants to question him because the way she approaches it is so aggressive and interesting. And I said, me too. I was astonished at what she did. And I still found her wonderfully likable anyway. And Jane, I meant to write 7 books. I sort of felt when we got to the end of 5, her story had completed. I could pick up Jane and go ahead with something new. I haven't thought that way yet. But she preys on my mind, so who knows? I might one day revisit her. She saved the world, but there's always another thing to save it.
This is my own question. You've written in so many different genres, or kind of touched on different genres. Is there any type of book that you have not tried that you've always wanted to try? Will we see a Dean Koontz Western at some point?
Well, now that's about where I was going. When I first started cross-genre, entering suspense novels with a love story in it, or with element of supernatural or a little bit of science fiction, I hit a wall with publishers back in the day because nobody was doing it. And I was told you can't do it. Well, I just kept plugging away at it because as a reader, I read in all genres. And I consider literary fiction just another genre. There's as much good work in every genre as there is in literary fiction. And if I'm reading in all of them, I really have the urge to write in. So, but the one thing that I've never been able to come up with is a Western story that I feel confident writing. And I loved Elmer Kelton and certain Western writers that I thought were superior. But as a reader, as a writer, I've never been able to do it. But who knows?
Who knows? Someday. Okay, Wendy. Okay, someone named Wendy asks, out of your many books, is there one that holds a special place in your heart?
Well, you fall in love with the characters, and you can't pick one book. You tend to identify more with characters, or I do, than with any particular storyline. So, Odd Thomas, Jane Hawk, Christopher Snow, a little crazy character in Frankenstein series called Jocko, a girl named Leilani Khan, One Door Away from Heaven. I really am wedded more to the characters than to any one story close to my heart. But if there's one book that's close to my heart, it isn't even one of the novels. It's the memoir of my dog Trixie, Big Little Life, which was one of the hardest and most joyful things I had to write. And we were talking about audio. The first time they recorded that, they wanted me to record it. And I was foolish enough to do it. Learned how difficult the job it is to narrate audio. But also how difficult it was when I got to her death at the end of the book. And they gave me 4 days to record it. I think we needed 2.5. And I think one of those days was by trying to get through the last 10 pages of the book. So I think I wandered from the question. But yeah, there is no one book. There's a whole multitude of characters, and there's therefore a multitude of books.
Here's a really nice question you don't hear very often. Sabrina asks, how did you obtain such an expansive vocabulary?
Part of it's who I like as a reader. Everybody from Ray Bradbury to Dickens and John D. MacDonald. You know, I don't mean to sound like a curmudgeon, but when I was reading, when I moved into reading as a young person, suspense fiction, we had a lot of erudite writers whose vocabularies were large. Ross Thomas, Ross MacDonald, you went through all of these writers, and you would go to the dictionary. I think a lot of that is lost, and I don't know why, except I think a lot of publishers discourage. I remember being told that I would never be a bestseller because my vocabulary was too large. That is sort of the contempt for the public out there. And that came to me from a major New York publisher. I've never felt that a vocabulary is an inhibitor to people, maybe a few people, but it certainly has been in my case. I never stopped to think about, is that a word everybody knows? I just think it's the right word. And we get a lot of mail like this, and it's surprising how many people really like that aspect of the books. So again, it's one of those common wisdom of publishing. It's common but not wise.
Anything else?
Let's see here.
Sometimes it's hard to go through all the comments because they come in so fast.
Well, just a general question about, do you have any words of wisdom for an aspiring writer?
I don't know how wise they are, but a lot of advice I could give. And one of them is talent is important, but perseverance matters nearly as much. And that's more true now than it's ever been. I once did a graduation speech where I said, you know, they're telling you that when you come out of what other people tell you in graduation speeches is they need you out there. They want you out there. You need to go out there and give them what you need because they need fresh blood. I said, the actual fact is they don't need you. We don't want you. And you're going to have to claw your way into anything you want to do. And that is essentially the true publishing. Especially if you've got a voice that's a little different, or you're telling the story in a way they're not used to. So perseverance matters, staying true to your own vision matters, but bonded with that is when being able to recognize good advice when you get it. And sometimes early that's difficult because you will get bad advice from editors and publishers. And then sometimes there'll be good advice. And you just have to be, I guess what I have to say is you have to remain humble. I do know there's people once they read the bestseller that say, I will not be edited anymore. That's a mistake. I'm such an obsessive compulsive, I do so many drafts before they see it of every page, that I don't get heavily edited. But sometimes there'll be strong advice about something that I will recognize is true. And I'm glad that I do, because in the finished book, when you see it in the store, it doesn't say by Dean Koontz with wonderful advice from. It's only me who gets all the credit for it. So it's better to listen and get what you can from other input, but be able to say, what's the difference between you?
That's an excellent point. In a really good editor-author relationship, it is a dialogue. And I think if you're, as a writer, too arrogant to listen to the fact that something may be unclear or wanders off the point or is excessive or is too minimalist or whatever, you have to recognize this is a person on your team who's reading the book as a reader, and probably often as nearly a first reader. So the fact that you know what you're doing, if you didn't translate that on the page, that's doesn't help.
All right. So I was going to ask, Teresa has two questions. Will you ever add a follow-up to Fear Nothing and Seize the Night? And then, do you have a favorite TV or movie adaptation of your work?
Well, first of all, biggest question as I get is, when the hell are you going to write the third Christopher Snow after Fear Nothing and Seize the Night? It's partly done, but here's the story on that. I have changed publishers. I've told this story, but many people haven't heard it. I changed publishers with the first Christopher Snow book, Fear Nothing. And the publisher seemed to like that one. But when Seize the Night came in, the publisher didn't like it. And I mean, the person who was the publisher. And really thought there was too much in the internet. There was too much of this and too much of that. And we had something of a struggle. I made changes, but I knew that some of the changes that were wanted would not have been in the service of the best book. So I didn't do them. And I realized at that point, here I am, 2 books into a 3-book contract. If I go forward and deliver the next book, this was my intention, there's a very good possibility I will be seeking a new publisher after 3 books. And I didn't want to do that. I liked this publisher as a person very much. I wanted this door. And so I said, okay, I will give him something else that he will prefer. And I'll do that for a couple of books, and then I'll go back to this. Well, creativity carries you away sometimes. And the book I gave him was a book called False Memory, which was a very large novel. And it immediately followed that with 2 more very large novels, From the Corner of His Eye and One Door Away from Heaven. And suddenly I was just on another path that was different from Chris Snow books. Now I'm no longer with that publisher, and so the first 2 books are stuck there. And do I write a 3rd book when I don't control the first 2? And not too long ago, as I was doing something for Devoted, and this question came up, it suddenly dawned on me, I could write that 3rd Chris Snow book as if the first 2 had never happened. I could get you into that story again without referencing all that other stuff except the essentials, and make it like almost a standalone. So I've been thinking about that since, and I may go that way if I live long enough. But sometimes you don't control what you can write because of the reaction that you get from all the people pushing on.
Is that it?
That's it.
All right.
Yep.
I wanted to mention, Dean, because we've talked a lot about the creative process and writing and voices and all the rest of it, but you really love research. I mean, we touched upon it a little bit, but it's like a hobby with you. And how do you balance your time between research and writing? Because it's too easy to just wander down a rabbit hole and never come out.
Well, that's one reason I do not do my research online. I give it to him. If there's something I can't find, published books or in journals that I get, sciences, or by calling somebody I know who is in that science, then I say to my assistant, go online and find me this. And the reason I do that is I know my obsessive mind, once I got online and I started chasing something, 3 months from now, I'd be into a totally other unrelated subject, but there would have been a chain of causation. And I just don't want to go there. So a lot of my pleasure reading time is reading things that become research, but I don't necessarily start out that way. It's amazement to me that I love the research because I never liked it in high school and college. I've said I faked it. I faked everything, papers, and I always got away with it. And then at some point I grew up, and I started finding it fascinating to learn. And I've also learned that readers love that in a book. If they can learn a little something without being tedious, and they're taken into some aspect of culture or science that they've never heard about, they do really like that, and it's part of what they relate to.
I love the fact that there can be Easter eggs in books. There can be Easter eggs, as Dean mentioned, like the Hebrew words for names that maybe only he and a few people will recognize, but gave him a lot of pleasure. But there can also be little information Easter eggs in books. I maintain that, in my case, Lord, 65, almost 70 years, probably 70 years of reading crime fiction, I have a complete rag bag full of information, much of it unrelated, much of it completely useless. But it's impossible not to acquire an extraordinary amount of knowledge just by reading. And I find it particularly true in crime fiction as opposed to other kinds. That, because authors do work hard at authenticity, despite the fact that it's fiction, they're held to a fairly high standard when it comes to, a police procedural. You can't just completely fake it. Having said that, there are certainly books in the old school where people just glossed over whatever the police were doing. So, that's different. Another rabbit hole. Let's end up with your dog. Let's talk about your dogs. I know how terrible it was for you to lose Trixie, but now you have, is it 1 or 2 Goldens?
Well, after Trixie, we had Elsa, or Anna, and Anna we lost also. And now we have Elsa. She's the lone dog. I'm not sure she would cope well with another dog because she's the most affectionate of the Goldens we've had, and that breed, they are enormously affectionate dogs. But this one wants to be glued to you if she can be. And so she's a blessing. They're all blessings. I can't believe I waited so late in life to have a dog. And now I have dogs for, I guess, close to 30 years. And I now can't imagine life without them because they make you laugh. I mean, I'm so far gone that we don't eat in a restaurant unless it's a restaurant with a patio where we can keep the dog. So the quality of food is important. It's secondary.
Well, writing's a lonely life, and a dog is a wonderful companion while you are engaged in your activity. They do provide warmth and love and affection and amusement. I don't know what we would do without ours either. And my only regret is that dogs, what was it my mother used to say? She always said that people live too long and dogs don't live long enough. Yeah.
If I was younger, I would agree.
Yeah, well, right. I'm not sure about the first part, but I absolutely subscribe to the dogs don't live long enough part. So anyway, it's really been a pleasure to speak to you again, Dean. I wish you great luck with your move, which I can imagine is a disruption because your normal working life is so structured and so long. It's hard for you, isn't it?
It's tough, and I've agreed to write 6 more nameless stories for Amazon. And I'm supposed to deliver them by the end of November. And here I am, packing books and writing. And anytime you move, even though it's what you want to do, it's kind of like shredding my life and giving up all that I am here. And I'm very wedded to place. Wherever I am, it's important to me that the place has things about it that I feel are beautiful and I relate to. And but once the new place is properly furnished, I go out and do the same. But I'm not quite sure. I don't want that long Amazon, but I'm going to have to stop sleeping.
Well, I think moving, if you've been on a place a long time, is really like undertaking an archaeological dig. I'm here to say that just cleaning our garage this weekend brought up a wealth of surprises that we had completely forgotten. So one possible activity during this pandemic is, in fact, to excavate your own living place in life and, find discovery. Well, I won't take up any more of your time since you clearly need to get back to work, but I'm pretty sure that Amazon will forgive you if you're slightly late. Thank you again, Dean, for signing all our copies of Elsewhere. Thank you all who were watching this for spending time with us tonight. Good night.
Thank you for having me there.
Thank you so much, Dean.